The fire at Ashworth Hall. The fire began just after midnight on the 3rd of May, 1844. Those who lived along the river road claimed they saw it first, a faint reddish glow behind the pines, then the sudden roar of the wind carrying smoke and cinders toward town. By the time anyone arrived, the eastern wing of Ashworth Hall was already a skeleton of blackened beams. Its roof collapsed into itself like a dying creature folding inward. No one could say how long the blaze had burned before it was noticed, but by dawn, what remained of the house was little more than stone, ash, and the stench of charred oak and flesh. 3 bodies were recovered from the ruins, one identified as Thomas Ashworth, the master of the estate, another, his youngest son Henry, and the third, an unidentified servant, burned beyond recognition. The only surviving member of the family was Margaret Ashworth, age 21. She had been found near the stables, barefoot, her nightdress streaked with soot and blood. She refused to speak to anyone that morning. When the sheriff's men tried to guide her toward safety, she only whispered a single word, downstairs. By the following afternoon, word of the tragedy had reached Darien and Brunswick. A crowd gathered near the gates, curious to see the ruins. Some crossed themselves when they caught sight of the house's remains. Others whispered that the fire had been God's punishment. The Ashworths were respected, yes, but peculiar. Too private, too educated, too proud of their lineage. There had always been talk about their habits, strange lights from the study after midnight, locked doors in the cellar, and the faint metallic smell that sometimes drifted from the property on still nights. Sheriff Hollis, an aging man known for his careful record-keeping, began his report that same day. His notes survive still, the ink faded but legible, scene of considerable destruction, walls of east and south wings collapsed entirely, central foundation partially intact, female survivor, Margaret, found coherent but refusing to answer questions, requests made for Reverend Samuel Ward to attend for spiritual counsel. When Reverend Ward arrived from the parish, the air above the property still shimmered with heat. The Reverend, a solemn man unused to spectacle, described the sight as an image of purgatory upon the living earth. He was the first to notice that the fire's path had not been natural. The flames had begun in 3 separate points: the east parlor, the chapel annex, and the master's study, all far apart from one another. Inside the study, the stone floor had buckled from heat. What remained of the desk was fused into a single mass of metal and ash. Yet beneath it, the Reverend discovered something peculiar, an iron-bound door, half-exposed where the floor had cracked. The hinges had melted, but the door itself had not burned. It led downward into the foundations of the house, though the passage beyond was sealed tight by fallen debris. When asked later about this, Reverend Ward admitted unease. It was as though the fire had been drawn around it, he said, as if the flame itself had been repelled by something below. Margaret Ashworth was moved into town and kept under watch at the physician's house. The doctor reported that her burns were minor, though her speech came and went in strange fragments. She muttered prayers in Latin she could not have known, and sometimes asked whether the voices had stopped. When her father's death was mentioned, she turned her face toward the wall and remained silent. For days the town speculated. Some said Thomas Ashworth had taken his own life after years of debt. Others whispered that Margaret had set the fire herself, driven mad by her father's cruelty. Yet there were darker stories too, old tales of the Ashworth bloodline, of what they had practiced in private. The family had once been known for its medical interests, though few in the county could say what that meant. In the winter of 1838, shipments of anatomical texts and surgical instruments had arrived from New Orleans, addressed to the Ashworth name. None of the servants could explain what they were used for, and when asked, Thomas only replied that he was a student of the human form. By the end of May, the coroner had completed his report. The cause of death for the elder Ashworth was listed as smoke and heat exposure. Henry's death was attributed to the same, but the third body, the unknown one, bore fractures inconsistent with the fire. The neck had been broken before the blaze began. The body was that of a man, tall and broad, shouldered, perhaps 30 years of age. No one came to claim him. The sheriff's records show that on June 2nd, an order was given to begin clearing the rubble and sealing the property. The Reverend protested, insisting the cellar should first be opened and blessed. He believed something beneath the ruin had escaped the flames, something that should not remain unexamined, but his request was denied. The town wished to forget. They said the matter was closed, that the Ashworth tragedy should be buried with the dead, and yet, in the nights that followed, travelers along the river road reported seeing light from the ruins, small, flickering, like a lantern moving beneath the ground. Dogs refused to go near the property, and in town, Margaret Ashworth began to speak again. Her first full sentence, recorded by the attending physician, was simple but chilling. "He is still awake down there." The doctor dismissed it as delirium. The Reverend did not. He began his own record, writing late into the night in the rectory. His first entry was dated June 5th, 1844. "If the soul lingers where justice is incomplete, then the soil beneath Ashworth Hall is heavy with unfinished penance. I have prayed, but the silence answers back." Testimony of the servants. The investigation began quietly, though the whispers never ceased. Sheriff Hollis called for any remaining servants of the Ashworth household to testify. Of the 6 who had once lived on the property, only 3 were found. The rest had vanished. Some fled to neighboring counties, others simply gone without word or trace. The first to be brought in was Martha Grier, the cook, a woman near 50 with gray hair tied tight and eyes that seemed to hold the weight of all the nights she dared not speak about. She sat across from the sheriff in the courthouse's lower chamber, her hands twisting a kerchief until it tore. "I told him," she said softly, eyes lowered. "I told the master that nothing good could come from digging up what's been put down, but he said it wasn't digging, it was reclaiming." The sheriff frowned. "Reclaiming what, Martha?" She hesitated, glancing at the door as though expecting someone to enter. "The blood," she whispered. He said the blood carried memory, and that memory was inheritance, that if the body can die but the blood remains uncorrupted, it can be made to speak again. Sheriff Hollis stopped writing. He meant experiments. Her silence was answer enough. When pressed, Martha admitted that she had often seen the master descend into the lower rooms, what he called the quiet house. The entrance was through the eastern study, behind a locked iron door. He would go there after midnight, sometimes with his son Henry, sometimes alone. From the kitchen floor, she could feel the faint tremors of movement below, metal striking metal, something heavy being dragged. The sheriff asked what the servants believed was beneath the house. "Not a cellar," she said. "A workshop, the kind no honest man should keep." The next testimony came from Elijah Prout, the stable hand. He was young, barely 20, and his fear was visible in every word. "The night before the fire," he began, "Mr. Ashworth sent me to fetch lye and spirits of wine from town. Said he needed them for preservation. But when I came back, he told me to leave it by the chapel door. He said the subjects had to be prepared." "Subjects?" the sheriff asked. Elijah nodded once. "Animals, I thought. He'd been buying goats, dogs, even a mare that never left the barn. But when I looked into the trough that night, I saw." He trailed off, unable to continue. "What did you see, son?" Elijah swallowed. "A man's hand, only that, white like wax and wrapped in wire." The courthouse grew still. When Reverend Ward later read the testimonies, he wrote in the margin of his copy, "The man trespassed beyond nature and called it study." There is no scripture that grants dominion over the dead. The third and final witness was Lucinda Bell, a young maid who had served Margaret directly. She appeared pale, trembling, and refused at first to speak at all. It was only after a long silence that she muttered something no one understood. He made her learn the prayers backward. The sheriff leaned closer. "Who?" "Mr. Ashworth. He said the old ways could open the gate, but only if spoken in pure blood. He said Margaret had the clearest blood of them all." Hollis felt a chill crawl up his spine. "You're saying her father?" Lucinda nodded, tears streaking the dust on her cheeks. He made her repeat the verses from the books he kept locked in the study. They weren't in English. Sometimes, when she said them wrong, he'd take a blade to her palm and say, "The voice must come from within the line." When asked what the line meant, she only whispered, "Family." After that, she refused to say more. By the end of the week, the testimonies were sealed. The sheriff's handwriting grows erratic in those final entries, the once neat script broken with ink blots and crossed words. One note stands out, written as if to himself. The servants' accounts contradict in small ways, but all agree on one point: the existence of a lower chamber unknown to the surveyors. Reverend Ward insists it must be located and sanctified. Miss Ashworth remains under watch, but her dreams grow worse. Indeed, Margaret's condition had deteriorated. The physician, Dr. Sloane, described her as lucid only in flashes. She spoke of the voices below, claiming they whispered through the cracks in the floor at night. She begged not to be left alone in the dark. When Reverend Ward visited her, she did not recognize him at first, but then she reached for his hand and said, "He's still calling them by name." "Whose names, child?" "The ones who came before us. The ones he said would never rest until the line was whole again." The Reverend left her room that evening and did not return for several days. He wrote instead in his private ledger, now known only through fragments recovered from the rectory after his death, "I believe the master sought to preserve his line by unnatural means, not through inheritance of virtue, but through the binding of flesh, memory conjoined with blood. The fire may have consumed the house, but if the blood remains, the work remains." By the time June's heat settled over the county, the Ashworth estate had become a place of superstition. Children dared each other to touch its gateposts. Travelers avoided the road after sunset. A single crow perched daily upon the chimney's ruin, unmoving even in rain. Then, on June 18th, the sheriff ordered the rubble cleared to verify the Reverend's suspicions about the cellar. It took 4 men and 3 days of labor before they uncovered the entrance, a slab of iron fused to stone, still cool despite the summer heat. When they finally pried it open, the air that escaped was foul, wet, and cold, like a tomb that had been breathing. Inside, they found a narrow stair descending into blackness, and on the first step lay a single item untouched by ash or soot, a small glass vial, half, filled with dark red liquid, and labeled in a trembling hand, "Lineage, Margaret." The chamber beneath the cellar beneath Ashworth Hall was nothing like the workrooms of ordinary men. Those who descended the stair that June morning described it as a vault, not a basement, constructed from fitted limestone, its walls damp yet smooth, with narrow alcoves carved at even intervals like burial niches. No light reached the lower depths. When the men held their lanterns high, the air itself seemed to resist illumination, thick with the scent of rust and decay. Sheriff Hollies led the descent, with Reverend Ward and Dr. Sloane close behind. The stair curved downward for nearly 30 feet before widening into a circular chamber. In the center stood a long stone table, its surface scored with shallow grooves and fitted with iron clasps at each corner. Above it hung a pulley fixed into the ceiling beam, blackened but intact. Around the room were shelves laden with jars and stoppered bottles, their contents distorted by time. Dr. Sloane, who had once trained in anatomy under a surgeon in Savannah, recognized the equipment immediately. "Dissection implements," he murmured, "and crude ones at that." But Reverend Ward disagreed. "No dissection here," he said, his voice thin. "This is preparation." Sheriff Hollies instructed his men to catalog what they could. 3 ledgers were recovered from a side table, their pages stiff with soot but still legible. The writing, in Thomas Ashworth's own hand, was meticulous, rows of measurements, observations, and notes written in both English and Latin. One page, dated March 3, 1008, 144, read, "Subject H. A. second son, circulatory rhythm diminished, attempted transfusion unsuccessful, blood thickened within 2 minutes, rejecting foreign strain, ratio unstable, requires donor of pure inheritance." Another, dated April 29th, just days before the fire, "The solution must reside in the origin itself. The lineage cannot be extended by graft. It must be recalled. The child bears the mark. Her blood remembers what the father forgets. Through her, the name will breathe again." Reverend Ward shut the book and crossed himself. He was not preserving the dead. He whispered he was calling them back. The sheriff ordered the chamber sealed again until the coroner could make a formal survey. Yet that night, when Hollies returned home, his wife swore he reeked of iron and earth. He complained of faintness and fever, muttering that he could still hear dripping beneath his feet. By morning his hair had gone half grey. Meanwhile, Reverend Ward insisted on visiting Margaret once more. She had grown weaker, her eyes sunken, skin pale, lips cracked from whispering through the night. The doctor claimed she was beyond saving, her mind consumed by shock. But when the Reverend entered her room, she turned toward him with unnatural clarity. "You opened it," she said. He hesitated. "Opened what, child?" "The room below. You shouldn't have gone in. He's not gone, not yet." Ward sat beside her bed, his trembling hand clutching his cross. "You mean your father?" Her expression faltered, something between grief and horror. "He said death was just a crossing of the line, that if the blood remembers, the body can be taught to listen. He made me watch." "Watch what?" Her voice fell to a whisper. "The returning." That same afternoon, one of the sheriff's men, Caleb Dunn, went missing from the excavation site. His lantern was found near the cellar door, the flame still burning. In the dirt beside it, a dark stain spread outward from a single footprint. The others assumed he'd fled in fright, but by morning, dogs from the next farm were found dead, their throats torn and eyes clouded black. Dr. Sloan, deeply disturbed, wrote a private letter to his colleague in Savannah. The man's notes suggest an attempt to manipulate hereditary passage through transfusion, mixing familial bloodlines to perpetuate vitality. Such a practice, though impossible by natural law, might explain the peculiar stability of the Ashworth Constitution. Yet if these attempts were indeed made with living kin, then the results may not have been simple death, but alteration. That word alteration appears again in the sheriff's later journals, underlined twice. By June 22nd, Reverend Ward had begun nightly vigils at the church. He claimed he could no longer sleep, that the shadows beneath the rectory moved as if something crawled beneath the floorboards. Parishioners reported hearing him chanting through the night, pleading for mercy. When pressed by townsfolk, the sheriff finally confessed that one more discovery had been made in the cellar, though it was kept from the official record. A wooden crate filled with wax, sealed jars, each containing what appeared to be fragments of human tissue suspended in pale liquid, some nothing larger than fingertips, others entire organs. Each was labeled with initials and dates, some reaching back to 1834. Among them was one marked E. A, born 1811. Reverend Ward identified the initials immediately. Eleanor Ashworth, Thomas's first wife, said to have died in childbirth. On the 25th of June, as the summer storms began to rise, Margaret's condition worsened. The physician recorded her final coherent words that night before sleep overtook her. He said the heart beats longer than the body. He said if you listen closely, you can hear them still. The next morning, she was gone. The window to her room stood open, the sheet torn where she had clutched it. There were no footprints outside, only a faint trail of blood leading from the sill toward the churchyard. Reverend Ward found the trail first. It ended at the gate of Ashworth Hall, where the ground had turned soft from rain. In the mud lay a single handprint, delicate, slender, unmistakably hers, pressed into the earth as though in farewell. Ward fell to his knees and began to pray. The sheriff's report for that day ends abruptly. The last line reads only, "No trace of the girl. The cellar sealed again by order of Reverend Ward. I pray it stays that way." But 2 nights later, townsfolk swore they saw a lantern moving through the fields near the ruins. Some claimed it was Ward himself. Others said it was Margaret, her white dress pale against the dark, her voice humming a slow, rhythmic tune that no one dared follow. The blood record by July of that same year, Ashworth Hall had already begun to rot. The upper floors collapsed inward, the walls wept moisture, and the air carried a faint sweetness of decay. Yet for reasons no one could name, the cellar remained untouched, its stonework dry, the iron fittings uncorroded. The people of Beaufort avoided the place, crossing themselves if they had to pass the lane that led toward it. Even animals refused to go near, but the silence did not last. On the 9th of July, Sheriff Hollies was found wandering barefoot along the main road at dawn. His eyes were vacant, lips moving soundlessly. When Reverend Ward brought him into the rectory, he reeked of earth and smoke. It took nearly 2 hours for him to speak a full sentence. "They called my name," he said, from under the stone. "The doctor declared it fever brought on by stress and exposure." But when Ward examined the sheriff's wrists, he found faint half-moon scars, as if fingernails, someone else's, had clawed at him in the dark. Holly's was confined to bed, raving about the book that bleeds when opened. 2 days later, Deputy Carter searched the sheriff's desk and found what he meant. A small notebook bound in black leather, the edges warped as though it had been wet and dried again. Inside, written in the same firm hand as Thomas Ashworth's other ledgers, was an entirely different kind of record. The entries were shorter, less analytical, more confessional. I have learned the body remembers, it keeps its oaths, the blood bears witness when all else forgets. She resisted the offering, as they all do at first, but her heart sang truer than mine. I tasted it. If I must die, let me return through her, let her carry me across. The final pages contained a series of drawings, circles, symbols, some resembling constellations, others too intricate to decipher. Beneath one such diagram were words scrawled hastily, "The gate is not beneath, it is within." That same week, Reverend Ward began keeping his own written testimony, convinced that what was unfolding had crossed from tragedy into damnation. He recorded the sheriff's mutterings, his own nightmares, and a series of unexplained disturbances that began plaguing the rectory. Doors slamming without cause, candle flames bending sharply toward the floor, and the incessant smell of iron that no amount of cleaning could erase. By July 15th, word spread that Deputy Carter had vanished. His horse returned to the stables at dawn, riderless, the saddle slick with blood along the edges. A search party was organized, but the trail led, inevitably, back to Ashworth Hall. There, inside the overgrown garden, they found a shallow pit freshly dug. Within it lay Carter's body, his chest torn open and his heart missing. What unnerved them most was the expression on his face. It was not terror, it was awe. Reverend Ward demanded the ruins be burned completely, but the townsmen hesitated. The last fire had nearly destroyed half the district, and few wished to invite another curse upon their land. Ward went alone that night, carrying a lantern and a copy of the Psalms. He was found the next morning unconscious beside the cellar entrance, his Bible drenched in something dark that the coroner refused to identify. When he regained consciousness, Ward told Dr. Sloan what he'd seen. His testimony survives in the physician's surviving papers, marked private, not for sermon. There was a figure at the bottom of the stairs, Ward said. Not a ghost, flesh and breath, but... Unfinished, it spoke in Thomas's voice, though the mouth was wrong. It said, "You can't shut what was born open." Then it stepped backward into the dark and was gone. Dr. Sloan described Ward's mental state as feverish delusion. Yet he resigned his practice and left Beaufort 3 days later, never to return. By late July, a second epidemic spread through the town, not of sickness, but of dreams. Half a dozen residents reported the same nightmare, standing in the churchyard at night, hearing a slow beating from beneath the ground, as though the heart of the earth itself were stirring. One woman swore she awoke with soil under her fingernails. The sheriff died on July 27th, his heart failing without warning. During his burial, the gravedigger uncovered a layer of limestone a few feet below the coffin's depth, unnatural, almost like the foundation of a building. When struck with a spade, it gave off a hollow sound. The reverend forbade further digging. That night, a storm rolled in from the coast. Lightning illuminated Ashworth Hill, showing the silhouette of the ruined house like a broken crown against the horizon. For a moment, the light struck something metallic glinting near the cellar entrance, something that looked like a door where no door had been before. By August 1st, Beaufort had emptied by nearly half. Families fled north, abandoning their homes and crops. Those who remained kept oil lamps burning from dusk till dawn, whispering prayers through their shutters. On the 4th, a rider arrived from Charleston carrying a letter addressed to Reverend Ward. It bore no return name, only the words from the estate of Margaret Ashworth. Inside was a single page, brittle and brown at the edges. The handwriting was unmistakable, Margaret's own. "Father Ward, you told me that death was the boundary between God and man. You were wrong. It is only the threshold, and some are strong enough to cross it twice. He is not beneath the stone. He is in the blood. I am with him now. M.A. Ward locked himself in the church for 3 days. No one saw him eat, drink, or sleep. On the third night, witnesses claimed the church bell rang 13 times, though it was rusted and had not been struck in years. When townsfolk forced the doors open at dawn, they found the reverend kneeling before the altar, his head bowed. At first they thought him in prayer, but when they approached, they saw that his cassock was soaked through, and beneath his hands lay an open book, the Ashworth record, its pages glistening red. There were no wounds upon his body, only a thin line across his wrist, as if something had been drawn out rather than spilled. The coroner sealed the book in the courthouse vault. It remained there for nearly 80 years, until the 1920s flood, when the entire building collapsed and the vault was swept downstream. The book has never been recovered, yet every year since, when the river runs low in midsummer, locals claim they can see the outline of its cover beneath the silt, black leather, unrotted, pulsing faintly as though still alive. The river remembers the flood that took the courthouse came in August of 1923, almost 80 years after the trial and execution of Thomas Ashworth. It began as a steady rain over the course of a week, nothing remarkable for that humid stretch of late summer. But on the 6th night, the Oconee River rose nearly 8 feet in a matter of hours. By dawn, the town square was a lake, the jail submerged, the records office torn open like a wound. Witnesses who survived spoke of hearing a low, rhythmic sound beneath the roar of the water. Not thunder, not the crash of collapsing wood, something slower, like a heartbeat muffled and patient. When the current receded 3 days later, Beaufort looked half erased. The post office, the courthouse, and the old rectory were gone. Only the foundation stones remained, but something else had been uncovered. In a grove south of the river, where the soil had been stripped bare by the flood, there appeared a set of perfectly circular impressions, 3 rings of earth hardened into black clay. No one could explain how they formed. The newspaper called them erosion circles. The older residents called them marks of return. Among the debris recovered near the courthouse ruins was a fragment of black leather binding, warped but intact. A clerk named Henry Dalton was tasked with cataloging it. He recorded the following in his official inventory: 1 partial volume, presumed record book. Leather cover blackened, bearing faint imprint of initials T.A. upon spine, no pages within. The fragment was boxed and sent to the county archive in Savannah, where it remained for decades. Dalton himself drowned less than a year later, his body found face down near the same stretch of river. The coroner's note reads simply, "No sign of struggle, cause presumed accidental." In 1931, during restoration of the Beaufort Church, workers discovered something sealed within the altar foundation. A small metal case, tarnished almost beyond recognition, containing a folded sheet of parchment. Written upon it, in the faded but unmistakable hand of Reverend Ward, were these words: "If you find this, know that I did what I could. The record is no book. It is a covenant, and its ink is blood. To read it is to speak his name, and to speak his name is to open the door anew. God forgive me, it will rise again by water." The discovery never reached the newspapers. The pastor overseeing the restoration, Reverend Samuel Green, quietly sent the note to the diocesan archive, where it vanished sometime during the 1950s fire. It was not until 1978 that the Ashworth story returned to public memory. A local historian, Professor Eliza Crane of Mercer University, came across fragments of the trial testimony while researching antebellum law. She noted irregularities in the records, the missing transcript of the last day's proceedings, the absence of Dr. Sloane's deposition, and the unexplained red staining on several folios stored in the state archive. Crane published her findings in a regional journal under the title, "The Ashworth Confession: Madness, Sin, or Ritual." The article drew modest attention but was soon withdrawn. The editor cited reader discomfort and unverifiable claims. What truly unsettled those who read it, however, was a single passage from Crane's field notes, found later among her papers after her death. "The river is not what it seems. At low tide, there are sounds beneath the stones, rhythmic as lungs. One night I heard it whisper my name, soft as silt. Knows, Professor Crane died that same summer, her car discovered overturned near the old Ashworth estate. The coroner listed her death as accidental, though the tires left no skid marks and her headlights were found still burning. Locals began to speak again of the record, though few remembered what it truly was. Some said it was a diary, others a spell book, but those who had lived longest swore it was something closer to a contract, a binding between the Ashworth bloodline and something beneath the earth. They said Thomas had not written to God at all, but to whatever lay waiting beyond him. In 1986, a group of high school students broke into the remains of Ashworth Hall, filming their exploration with a camcorder. Only fragments of the tape survived, but one segment, timestamped 2:14 a.m., showed the camera panning across the cellar steps. In that moment, the lens caught a reflection, not from the flashlight, but from something metallic moving within the dark. Then, faintly, a man's voice, spoke 2 words, "Still here." The footage was turned over to the sheriff's office and sealed. None of the boys ever returned to the site. By the early 2000s, the estate was swallowed entirely by forest. Only the foundation stones remained visible through the undergrowth, forming a rough ring, eerily similar to the erosion circles left by the flood. Hunters who camped nearby claimed their dogs refused to cross the line of stone. Those who forced them said the animals howled and bolted before dawn, trembling and slick with sweat, as if they'd been running from fire. In 2015, Beaufort's Small Historical Society erected a marker near the riverbank to commemorate the Ashworth incident of 1844. The plaque described the executions, the trial, and the plantation's destruction, but said nothing of the book, nor of Reverend Ward's final warning. At the dedication ceremony, a light rain began to fall. As the chairman gave his closing remarks, one of the guests, a local historian, noticed the soil around the base of the marker turning dark, almost black. She bent down, touched it, and found it warm to the hand. That evening, the marker cracked clean through the center. The fracture was jagged yet symmetrical, almost deliberate, as though something beneath had pressed upward. 2 nights later, a fisherman on the Oconee reported seeing a figure standing knee-deep in the river, head tilted as if listening. When he called out, the figure turned, and though it was too far to see the face, he swore it smiled. Then it walked backward into the water and was gone. The sheriff dismissed the account as local superstition. Yet the following morning, muddy footprints were found along the shore, bare, long, towed and leading away from the water toward the ruins of Ashworth Hall. No one followed them. In the church registry, Reverend Green's successor wrote a single new note beside the record of Ward's death. Every 71 years, the river remembers. If that pattern holds, the next rising is due soon. And if the flood comes again, as it did before, perhaps the book will rise with it, its pages unspoiled, its ink still warm. The anatomist's folly by the time medical curiosity returned to the Ashworth affair. A century had already washed the blood from the record, at least on paper. Yet the name lingered in university halls like an infection no one dared diagnose aloud. In 1952, Dr. Harold L. Fenwick, lecturer of anatomy at Emory College, received permission to examine the remnants of the Ashworth family crypt. The project was framed as osteological research into pre-Civil War burial practices, though Fenwick's private letters to his colleague Dr. McIlroy reveal a different motive. There are suggestions. He wrote that Ashworth's remains may show congenital abnormalities consistent with hereditary degeneration. My interest is purely medical, though I confess an unease I cannot name. They say the soil itself resists the spade. The excavation began in early March. Fenwick was accompanied by 2 graduate assistants and a county gravedigger. The crypt lay half collapsed beneath an oak whose roots had devoured the marble lintel. The air was damp, sweet with rot, as though the ground still breathed. They uncovered 3 coffins, all unmarked save for a faint crest carved into the middle one, a serpent encircling its own tail. Fenwick ordered them opened in sequence. The first contained the bones of a woman, presumably Clara Ashworth, though decomposition had reduced her to little more than a pale silhouette in dust. The second held the remains of a child, unsexed, malformed, skull elongated like clay drawn by a trembling hand. The third, heavier than the rest, bore the name Thomas faintly scratched into the lid. When the seal broke, a rush of cold air rose from the coffin, startling the gravedigger so that he dropped his lantern. Fenwick later described the sensation in his field notes. It was as though the temperature fell 20 degrees in an instant. The odor was not of decay, but of something metallic, sterile, like wet iron. Within, the body lay intact, no sign of skeletal collapse, flesh preserved in a state inconsistent with natural mummification. Fenwick believed he had discovered an example of spontaneous adipocere formation, a chemical preservation of fatty tissue sometimes seen in long, buried corpses. Yet this case defied explanation. The eyes had not rotted but turned the color of smoked glass. Against the objections of his assistants, Fenwick ordered a partial dissection. His notes from that night survive in fragments written in a hurried scrawl, tissue pliant, blood present though thickened, heart cavity hollow yet lined with crystalline deposit, no evidence of embalming, hands clenched around small object resembling vertebra. That vertebra, later catalogued in the university collection, was determined to be human, but unnaturally shaped as though twisted before ossification. By midnight, Fenwick's assistants refused to continue. They claimed the ground beneath the crypt had begun to pulse faintly like breath. One swore he heard a sound like someone tapping from below. The doctor dismissed their fears and continued alone. When he failed to report the next morning, campus security found him collapsed on the floor of his laboratory. The specimen tray beside him was empty. Fenwick survived, though his mind did not. He awoke 2 weeks later in a sanatorium, muttering the same phrase again and again. It wasn't his. It never was his. The official account described a nervous collapse induced by chemical exposure, but the attendance journal at the asylum includes more troubling details. On several nights, Fenwick's room was found soaked through as if submerged. Once, a nurse swore she saw handprints on the inside of the window, too large to be his. After his death in 1956, Fenwick's estate was catalogued. Among the papers was a sealed envelope addressed to McIlroy. The letter inside read, "I was wrong. It is not preservation but continuity. The flesh remembers. I think it still listens. Burn the remains. Burn them all." The remains, however, were never burned. The vertebra was retained for study, stored in a climate-controlled drawer in the medical archive. Over the years, several researchers reported malfunctions of the temperature controls in that section. Always at night, always confined to the single drawer marked A144. One curator, Dr. Helen Cross, documented her experience in a private memorandum. "Every time I pass the case, the glass fogs from within. I've had it checked repeatedly. No leaks, no humidity fluctuation. Once I heard a faint tapping when I turned off the lights. It came from the inside." The specimen was eventually transferred to the basement of the Georgia Medical Repository in 1972, where it was catalogued under a generic label, Unidentified Human Sample, mid-19th century. There it remained until 1991, when the building's lower archives flooded during a burst water main. The damage report, filed by maintenance crew, lists several destroyed items, but the drawer marked A144 was recorded as missing prior to incident. No record exists of its relocation. That same summer, several residents of Beaufort reported hearing hammering at night from the direction of the old Ashworth property. One farmer, Earl Jansen, claimed he saw light flickering underground near the riverbank, as though someone were working beneath the soil. By autumn, small animals, mice, birds, raccoons, began turning up desiccated along the waterline. No marks of predation, just drained, stiff, and pale. The county veterinarian dismissed it as environmental poisoning, but his assistant, a young woman named Rosalie, later wrote in her diary, "The bodies were empty, no blood, no smell, no sign of rot. It's like they were hollowed clean." 3 months later, Rosalie went missing after visiting the site to collect samples. Only her notebook was recovered, its last line written in smeared ink, "I found the ring." No one knew what she meant, though old residents might have guessed, the blackened circles left by the river long ago. Those marks had returned, faint but spreading, half a mile from the original site, and at their center the soil was warm. It is said the Ashworth name died with Thomas, but those who have studied the lineage know better. The blood scattered, married into other lines, changed its spelling but not its nature. Dr. Fenwick's great-granddaughter lives still in Savannah. She refuses to speak of her ancestors' work, yet her house backs directly onto the Oconee's edge. The locals whisper that sometimes, when the tide is low, the water around her dock ripples without wind. Some things, once dissected, refuse to stay dead. The doctor's ledger when the courthouse fire consumed the Ashworth trial records in 1844, not all evidence perished. Among the debris, a single leather-bound notebook survived, the private medical journal of Dr. Elias Sloane, physician to both the Ashworth family and the Beaufort Township. The journal remained sealed for nearly a century, passed quietly from clerk to clerk, until it surfaced again in 1937 during an estate audit. The handwriting was careful, elegant, though the later pages grew erratic, as if written under duress. Its first entries were clinical: fevers, births, fractures, ordinary accounts of rural medicine. But by the third section, Sloane's tone shifted. He began referring to an unclassified hereditary malformation observed within the Ashworth bloodline, recurrent in both cranial and thoracic structure. The children born to Thomas Ashworth and his wife show signs of duplication within the sternum and ribs, as though the body were forming a vessel within itself. The deformity does not impair movement, but appears accompanied by violent night terrors and fixation upon the river. Sloane had performed discreet examinations at Thomas's request, though he recorded his growing alarm. The boy, Jonathan, age 8, presents with rhythmic pulsation of the chest cavity independent of heart action. The mother swears she can hear a second beat when he sleeps. He suspected congenital abnormality, some freakish quirk of biology, but as the months passed, his notes darkened. Observed faint movement in deceased infant female 6 hours post-mortem. No respiration, yet thoracic cavity convulsed as though from within. I have no explanation. The father forbade burial for 3 days, claiming the breath is not yet gone. On final examination, I found the lungs filled, not with air, but with river silt. After this entry, several pages were torn out. The remaining text resumes weeks later, unsteady and urgent. Mr. Ashworth has requested my silence. He insists this lineage bears a sacred burden. He believes the body capable of translation between this world and another. I fear he mistakes pathology for divinity. By late autumn of that year, Sloane began recording his own symptoms, waking to find water on his pillow, hearing faint knocks within his walls, the smell of brine where no leak existed. He confessed to feeling called to the river, as if some interior tide pulled him toward it. Then, one evening, the tone of his handwriting changed entirely. Smaller, more deliberate, as though he were transcribing someone else's words. "You will not cut me open again." That line appears 3 times across a single page, the ink thick and pressed deep into the paper. Beneath it, written in Sloane's own steadier hand, "I am not alone in this body. Something answers when I write." The journal then veers into a blend of medicine and theology, the doctor trying to rationalize the impossible. He notes that the deformities correspond to no known disease pattern, but the growths of secondary hearts, as he called them, seemed to pulse only when the moon reached its highest point. These cavities do not decay, they feed upon the host, yet preserve it. The heart beneath the heart does not die. In February 1844, 2 months before the Ashworth estate burned, Sloane documented a final examination of Thomas himself. He wrote that the patient's skin had grown translucent in certain lights, veins visible like dark roots beneath the flesh. I observed within the sternum a faint illumination, pale and constant. Subject denies pain. He claims it is the inheritance of the river, the same pulse that beats beneath all life. I fear he intends to prove it. No more entries appear after that night. The remainder of the book is blank, except for the back cover where someone, perhaps Sloane or another hand, etched the following words with the point of a scalpel: "The second heart will outlive the first." The ledger disappeared soon after the estate fire, but was rediscovered in 1979 by estate archivist Paul Cates, who was cataloging damaged medical artifacts. Cates described the volume as unusually heavy for its size, its pages permanently damp though sealed. When he opened it, the air filled with a smell like rust and rain. The ink of the earliest pages had bled into the parchment, forming shapes almost organic in pattern, vein-like, branching across margins. Cates's written report ends mid-sentence. He was found collapsed in the archive basement, unconscious but alive, a trail of muddy water leading from his shoes to the ledger's resting case. When he awoke, he could not recall what he had seen, only repeating a single phrase in a low voice. It was still beating. The book was resealed, labeled Restricted Private Medical Evidence 1844, and stored in a temperature-controlled vault. It has not been opened since, yet stories persist. The janitorial staff claim that sometimes, late at night, they hear a soft thudding from the shelves. Others say they've seen condensation on the glass where the ledger rests, droplets forming in the pattern of a heartbeat. In 2002, a visiting researcher from London, Dr. Malcolm Rhodes, managed to view the ledger briefly before it was withdrawn again. His written impression, published privately, contained this note: "The handwriting is not all of one hand. Toward the end, the pen strokes alter, curving leftward, anatomically improbable for the author's injury. The lines seem drawn from beneath, as though written by the page itself." Dr. Rhodes died in a car accident returning to his hotel that evening. The official report cites brake failure. His wife later donated his personal effects to the university. Among them was a stethoscope, rusted and warped, wrapped in linen. Attached was a note in his own writing. When I listened, there were two. Since then, the ledger has become something of a whispered legend among the faculty, a cursed curiosity. The archivists treat it with ceremony, never moving it except in pairs, always gloved, never alone. They joke that it keeps its own pulse, though none laugh for long. Still, one question remains unanswered, printed in faded ink across the spine's inner binding, a single Latin phrase that no one noticed until recently. Cor diluvii meminit, the heart remembers the flood. And if it remembers, perhaps it also waits. The flood revisited the river had always been Beauford's spinet's current cutting through generations, feeding fields, drowning secrets. By the time the 20th century turned, the town had built its livelihood upon it, mills, ferries, bridges. Yet when spring floods came in 1908, the water rose higher than any living man remembered. The Ashworth estate, long abandoned and left to rot, stood on the lowest bend of that river. The ruins of the hall had become a local haunt, half wallowed by vines and silt, its foundations warped like softened bone. No one farmed that ground anymore. They said the soil turned the color of bruises after rain. During the flood, a portion of the old east wing, what remained of the doctor's quarters, collapsed into the riverbank. Children found bones lodged in the roots the next morning, pale and clean as ivory. The sheriff collected them and sent them to the county coroner in Augusta, who noted something peculiar. Every rib cage was cracked from within outward, as though something beneath the sternum had pressed until the bone gave way. The coroner's report was filed, then quietly sealed. That summer, the river shifted course slightly east, carving away the soil around the ruins and exposing what looked like a buried wall, lined with strange black stones arranged in a crescent. Farmers claimed they'd seen a faint light glowing between them at night, like the river was breathing. By autumn, the stories had grown. Men refused to hunt near the bend. Fishermen said they could feel something move under the boat when the current slowed, something large, something that did not follow the rhythm of the tide. Then, in 1910, a traveling preacher from Macon, Reverend Amos Bell, announced he had been called by the Lord to cleanse the Ashworth Bend. He led a revival there, drawing hundreds. For 2 nights they sang hymns by torchlight, On the third night, the river rose without warning. Witnesses claimed the current changed direction, pulling inward, as if some unseen mouth had opened beneath the surface. Dozens were swept away. Reverend Bell was last seen wading waist, deep into the torrent, holding a wooden cross above his head. His body was never recovered. After that, the county declared the land condemned. The river swallowed what was left of Ashworth Hall. Only the chimney stacks remained visible above the waterline, marking the place like gravestones. Decades passed, Beaufort modernized, electric lights, paved streets, but the river never lost its pull. In 1979, during the drought that revealed the doctor's ledger, the water at the Ashworth Bend receded to its lowest level in a century. A group of surveyors, mapping erosion patterns, uncovered the cellar foundation of the hall beneath the mud. Inside, they found remnants of a staircase and, at its base, a wooden door still sealed by iron bands. The lead surveyor, Howard Lang, ordered it opened. When the hinges broke, a burst of cold air escaped, smelling of salt and decay. Lang descended first. His flashlight beam caught something glimmering, a pool of black water at the center of the chamber. Floating upon it was a small, heart-shaped locket, engraved with the initials ES. They took photographs, none developed properly. The negatives showed only static gray, as if the film had been exposed to light from within. Lang's field journal, however, survives. His notes, written the same day, grew erratic after the discovery. Temperature in chamber inconsistent, pockets of warmth and cold, surface of water moves though no air flow detected, sound recorded, faint, rhythmic, organic, could be dripping, could be. The entry trails off. The next page is smeared, as though the paper had absorbed water from his hands. The final words legible read, "It's still beating." Lang disappeared 2 weeks later while returning to the site alone. His truck was found by the roadside, doors open, engine running, radio playing static. The keys lay in the mud by the tire tracks that led straight into the river. In the years since, the Ashworth Bend has remained fenced off. Locals avoid it, though each generation passes down its own version of the same warning. Don't go near the water when the moon's full. It remembers who you are. Environmental studies in the 1990s detected abnormal mineral patterns along that stretchshire, rich sediment arranged in rhythmic bands, almost like fingerprints pressed into the riverbed. Experts called it coincidence. The old families of Beaufort called it proof. And when the town's new bridge was built in 2006, workers unearthed a stone tablet beneath the silt. The engraving had nearly vanished, but the final line was still visible. The heart of the river beats beneath all flesh. The county museum refused to display it. The foreman who lifted it claimed he felt something moving inside the stone, a soft, hollow pulse. 2 days later, he left town without collecting his pay, but there are those who say the flood is not finished. Each decade, when the rains return and the water swells against its banks, strange things surface. Not record, remains. Twice in the past 20 years, fishermen have pulled up bones blackened by mineral deposits, yet preserved like they had never aged. Once, a diver from Atlanta, curious about the legend, found fragments of iron shackles bound together by something that looked like tissue, not rust. The diver left his gear by the riverbank and vanished before dawn. His partner later described hearing a sound rising from the depths. Not rushing water, not bubbles, but something slower, deliberate, like a heartbeat, heavy and patient, echoing through the current. When the sheriff's team dragged the river days later, they found nothing. Only the soft rhythm of the water against the stones, steady as breath. Some nights, when the moon turns white over the bend, locals swear the river glows faintly beneath the surface, an inner pulse that moves with purpose, as if remembering the shape of what it once held. They call it the second heart now, a phrase whispered among old families and passed to new children with the same uneasy laughter that hides belief. They say it never stopped beating, that the Ashworths merely carried what the river began. And if you stand near the fence on a still night, when the world goes quiet and even the frogs fall silent, you might hear it too, that deep, measured thud beneath the soil, a heart remembering the flood and waiting for another body to wear. The return of the river by the spring of 2014, Beaufort had grown quiet again. Most of the old mills were gone, the railway long rusted. The town existed on the edge of modern maps, a place passed through, never toward. But that year, the rains came early and did not stop. By May, the river had risen 20 feet, washing away the fence that once marked the forbidden bend. When the floodwater finally receded, the top of a stone arch emerged from the mud, half buried, carved with symbols no historian could identify. Local children called at the door. At first, the discovery drew curiosity. Photographs appeared on social media, tagged with jokes about ghosts and curses. But within a week, the first accident happened. A graduate student from Atlanta, Rebecca Tillman, had come to document the carvings for her thesis. Her last recorded message, sent at 2:13 a.m., read, "The sound's louder now, it's under the water. I think there's something behind the door." She was found the next morning lying face down in the mud, her clothes dry, her body cold. The coroner noted her lungs were filled with river water, though she had not drowned in the river. The sheriff sealed off the site, but rain kept falling. Every downpour pushed more soil away from the arch, revealing a deeper tunnel beneath. Those who lived near the bend claimed they saw movement inside, something like breath passing between the stones. By late June, the town's water supply turned brown. Residents complained of metallic taste, faint odor of rot. The municipal tests showed nothing irregular, no contamination, no bacteria, but the technicians refused to return. One of them told a reporter he saw ripples moving upstream against the current, like veins carrying blood to a heart. When the first light flickered on the river's surface, it was mistaken for reflected lightning. But the sky was clear. The glow came from below, a dull red pulse that grew brighter each night. On the fourth night, it spread, threads of crimson running down the tributaries, glowing faintly like arteries under skin. Old families remembered. They whispered that the Ashworth curse had returned, that the river was waking again. The town council called it superstition, but their emergency meeting minutes tell a different story. In the archived recording, you can hear one councilman whisper, "You don't hear it, that sound," before the tape cuts out. 2 weeks later, a local journalist named Thomas Ainsley began investigating the site for a historical column. He visited the archives at the county courthouse, where he found the sealed case file labeled the Ashworth Proceedings, 1008-144. The clerk warned him it was cursed paper, half in jest, but handed it over anyway. Inside were the original transcriptions of Dr. Silas Ashworth's experiments, his wife's journal fragments, and the 1008-144 testimony of the slaves executed for unnatural congress. But between the pages, Ainsley discovered something that did not belong, a newer sheet written in fountain ink dated May 19, 1979. It reads simply, "It is still beneath us, the water keeps its shape." The handwriting matched that of Howard Lang, the missing surveyor. Ainsley published a brief article online titled "The Door in the River." He described the connection between the flood of 1008-144, the 1908 collapse, and the 1979 discovery. The article went viral for one night before disappearing entirely. The site hosting it shut down. Ainsley's laptop was found in his car at the edge of the bend, the interior soaked though the windows were closed. The sheriff's report lists the cause of death as massive cardiac failure. But witnesses said his body was bloodless. By August, the river had changed color. At noon it gleamed normal brown, but under moonlight it turned black, blue, as if reflecting something beneath the surface rather than above it. Livestock refused to drink from it. Fish surfaced dead, their eyes milky, gills flared as though suffocating on air. A team from the State Environmental Agency arrived. They set up instruments, sealed samples, and placed a submersible camera into the current. For 30 seconds, the feed showed nothing but silt. Then a shape appeared, slow, immense, coiling through the water like muscle beneath skin. The feed cut out, and every monitor in the command tent went black. When power returned, all data had been erased. The lead technician quit that night. He left a single handwritten note on the desk. The water was breathing. Then came the night of the return, September 14, 2014. Around midnight, townsfolk reported a low hum reverberating through the valley, vibrating window panes, stirring dust from the floorboards. The river glowed brighter than ever, red like burning coal. Emergency crews rushed toward the bridge, but before they reached it, the current reversed direction, surging backward up the tributaries. The air grew thick, metallic. Trees bent inward as if drawn toward the water. One witness, Deputy Carl Morton, later told investigators, it looked like the river was turning itself inside out, like it wanted out of the ground, and then it came. From the heart of the bend, the surface broke, not like an explosion, but a birth. Something vast and fluid rose without form, illuminated from within. Its surface shimmered with faces, hundreds, shifting, merging, some human, some unrecognizable. It made no sound except for the steady, deliberate thud, like a drumbeat echoing from within the water. Morton and his partner fled. When they looked back, the entire bend had collapsed inward, swallowing the arch, the banks, the bridge, everything. The glow disappeared beneath the churning water. By morning, the river was calm again. The bend had deepened by nearly 20 feet. Nothing of the site remained. No arch, no equipment, no sign of struggle. In the aftermath, state officials declared it a ground collapse due to subsurface erosion. They rebuilt the road farther upstream. Beaufort moved on again, as it always did by forgetting, but the locals say that after heavy rain, when the fields flood and the river swells, you can still see the red pulse moving beneath the current, faint and rhythmic. Some nights, the hum returns, and those who stand too close claim they feel it inside their own chests, matching beat for beat. The river remembers its shape, and every century it asks to be fed again. The last beating, they opened the vault again in 2022, not by intention but by accident. A construction team, digging foundations for a new highway bypass along the south bank of the Ogeechee, struck something solid beneath the clay. The machine stalled, then shuddered once before losing all power. When the foreman went to check, he found the bucket wedged against an iron ring, blackened by age and thick with silt. The workers pried at it, thinking it a remnant of the old bridge. But the ring came loose with a hollow pop, like the release of breath long held. The ground around them trembled, not violently, but subtly, like something turning in its sleep. They uncovered what looked like a sealed hatch, built into a foundation of stone that none of the local surveys had ever recorded. The company halted work. County officials were called in. Soon after, an archaeological unit from the University of Georgia arrived, led by Dr. Miriam Cohen, an anthropologist who specialized in 19th-century burial rites. She documented the site meticulously. Beneath the hatch lay a descending spiral staircase carved into the rock itself. The air that rose from below was cold and sweet, like river fog. Instruments detected no methane, no rot, no trace of life, but the team reported hearing faint rhythmic thudding, spaced evenly, like a heartbeat echoing through the stone. Dr. Cohen requested additional funding for deeper exploration. Her first report concluded the structure predates the town itself, possible religious function, though construction methods suggest access from beneath, not above. The rhythmic sound persists independent of environmental factors. The file ended there. 3 months later, in December 2022, Cohen's graduate assistant, Illy Garner, uploaded a 14-minute video to a private research forum. It was titled Ashworth Origin. Mauve. In it, the camera follows him as he descends the spiral, light trembling on the damp walls. He counts 20, 7 steps before the passage opens into a low chamber, half flooded. The water glows faintly red. At the center of the chamber sits a mass of organic material, pulsing slowly. Its surface is translucent, threaded with black veins. Each pulse sends a ripple across the water. The sound is unmistakable, a living heart impossibly large. Garner's voice shakes as he whispers, "It's still beating after all this time. It's still beating." Then a second voice, low, distorted, seems to whisper back from within the chamber, not still, always. The footage ends abruptly. The video was removed from the server within the hour. Garner disappeared the same night. In early 2023, Dr. Cohen was found wandering along the riverbank barefoot and silent. She could not explain how she got there. Her shoes and coat were discovered neatly folded beside the hatch, which had been resealed from within. Medical records describe her as catatonic, pulse erratic, exhibiting sympathetic response to external rhythm. She did not speak again for months. When she finally did, it was a single phrase, repeated over and over, "The water remembers." The state seized the site soon after. Officially, it became Project Delta 1844, a containment study for subterranean hydrogeological instability. The public was told nothing more. But leaked correspondence between two technicians, dated February 9, 2024, described a terrifying discovery. The biological sample remains active. The rhythmic signal synchronizes with human pulse within a 30-foot radius. Those exposed for longer than 40 seconds begin to mirror the beat. Involuntarily, within weeks, the site was abandoned. The last entry in the project log reads, "Subject unstable. Containment compromised by infiltration from groundwater. Do not excavate again." The coordinates were erased from the county registry, but you can still find them faintly in older online maps if you zoom far enough down. River, Beaufort remains quiet. Few remember the Ashworth name. The old mill road is overgrown, the church long collapsed. But every few years, when the river floods, something washes up. A piece of iron, a page of yellowed paper, once even a medical tag etched with the initials S.A. Those who live near the bend still hear it on humid nights, a muffled thud beneath the soil, faint but steady, like a buried pulse beneath their feet. The rhythm matches the human heart precisely, 68 beats per minute. Some swear it slows when you listen, as though it is listening back, and there are stories, always the same, of those who follow the sound too far. They walk into the fog, shoes sinking into the soft red mud, whispering names they do not remember learning. By dawn, only footprints remain, pressed deep and filled with water that glows faintly crimson when the first light touches it. If you drive down Highway 92 today, there's a faded sign half sunk in the weeds, Ashworth Crossing ESD, 1834. No one builds there anymore. But on certain nights, when the air is heavy and the moon is swollen, travelers say they can hear a heartbeat pulsing through the engine hum, slow and patient, keeping time with the curve of the road as it follows the river. And if you pull over, roll down the window, and listen long enough, you might realize the sound isn't coming from beneath the earth at all. It's coming from you.